wegen dem Livestream.
Ja.
You go. Good morning and very warm welcome to the European Legal Support Center's database launch on anti-Palestinian repression in Germany. It's good. Oops, does it work? Yeah, it's good to see so many people could make it in person, but I also want to welcome everyone who joins us online on our live stream. So the program today, with me on the podium are Laila, Monitor Project Manager at the European Legal Support Center, who will give the main presentation. Afterwards, we have Zaid, who has experienced or faced extreme anti-Palestinian repression in Germany firsthand. He will talk a bit about his case. Robert, from our partner organization Forensic Architecture Forensis, will talk about the contributions of these organizations to our project. And finally, Sophia, Monitor Officer at the European Legal Support Center, will talk about our database as an ongoing project. Afterwards, we will have a 30 minutes Q&A session, and we will be available for interviews as well after this session. My name is Karim. I'm Advocacy and Communications Officer at the European Legal Support Center. And before we start, I want to say a few words about our organization and this project specifically. So the European Legal Support Center was established in 2019 by the Palestinian NGO network, which is a network of over 200 Palestinian civil society organizations. At that point, anti-Palestinian repression in Europe had been escalating since decades, and there was a clear need for legal support against it. But very early on, we noticed we cannot provide effective legal support without understanding the extent, the scope, and the mechanisms of anti-Palestinian repression in Europe. So we started to collect incidents of anti-Palestinian repression, and what we present today is the outcome of 5 years of work. But I want to stress this: we will not present just isolated cases today. Anti-Palestinian repression in Europe is structural. It is undeniable, it is escalating, and we can prove it. We will not be intimidated. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Before I start, I want to thank the ELSC's monitor and research team for all the work, care, and precision they have put into this project. Without their dedication, thorough research, and very sharp eyes, this project would not have been possible. As everyone knows, there is an ongoing genocide against the Palestinian people and a violent settler colonial occupation in Palestine that has expanded for decades. Yet, there are some among us within government and those responsible for the production of knowledge, especially the news, who are trying to condition people of conscience to write a blank check for genocide. In the words of Adichie, power is the ability not just to tell the story of another person, but to make it the definitive story of that person. On the screen behind me, you can see hundreds upon hundreds of instances in which allegations of anti-Semitism, support for terrorism, and/or claims of breach of policy were used to make those allegations the definitive story of Palestine solidarity. Murid Barghouthi once wrote that if you want to dispossess a people, the simplest way to do it is to tell their story and start with secondly. Start the story with the arrows of the Native Americans and not with the arrival of the British, and you have an entirely different story. Start the story with the failure of the African state and not with the colonial creation of that African state, and you have an entirely different story. The research we are presenting you today is exactly that. It's a database of coordinated efforts to start the story of a movement fighting for truth and justice with secondly. That is to say, the language and methods used by European media, politicians, and state institutions, and many others, when it comes to Palestine is aimed at making a thought diverging from the colonial narrative literally unthinkable. Today, we are launching a database of repression in an attempt to speak truth to power. The repression of Palestine solidarity across Europe is a continuation of a colonial pattern that denies the history and reality of the colonized. This denial seeks to destroy, distort, and negate Palestinian identity in order to manufacture consent for settler colonialism and genocide in today's times. To facilitate this, the same project seeks to deter and silence international solidarity with the Palestinian people by repressing and criminalizing those who stray away from the government narrative on its foreign policy. By repression, we do not merely mean the silencing or prohibition of speaking out against the genocide. Repression is a broader process by which certain ways of speaking about Palestinian liberation are delegitimized, criminalized, or rendered unspeakable through legal, cultural, and institutional mechanisms. This includes the selective framing of anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism, the disciplining of academic and artistic expression, and the policing of political solidarity through state surveillance, employment sanctions, and threats to one's migration status. In this sense, repression functions not only to censor, but to shape what is acceptable discourse, producing a political reality in which solidarity with Palestine is marked as deviant, dangerous, or outside the bounds of democratic speech. While the law may still be capable of addressing, managing, and partially containing the infringements on collective or individual freedoms, it ultimately operates within and is shaped by a broader legal and political framework that is itself historically colonial and systematically repressive. As such, it lacks the tools to fully account for or challenge the deeper architecture of repression we are witnessing today, both in relation to Palestine and way beyond. What is urgently needed for policymakers, lawyers, movements, organizations, academics, and journalists alike is a contextualized political analysis of current events that can offer a coherent political and legal counter-narrative to the colonial narrative. As important as our legal work in challenging the violations of legal rights and civic freedoms is, it has reached its limits. After 5 years of legal victories against repressive policies like the anti-BDS resolution, anti-problematic IHRA definition, and producing one report or sending one communication after the other, they continue to be used, expanded, and reinvented to suppress dissent. To respond to this, our investigation highlights broader patterns of repression and exposes the systematic nature of efforts to silence Palestine solidarity and crack down on dissidents of government policies. For this reason, we are launching a public-facing database visualized by forensic architecture and forensics. The ELSC has identified 8 mechanisms of silencing by documenting incidents of repression across sectors of society, tracing the flow of allegations used to justify the attacks, and analyzing their impacts on the targets of those attacks. The argument that no fundamental, constitutional, or democratic rights are being violated, and that all these means, including the unlawful use of force by the police, are isolated cases which are justified because of anti-Semitic or terrorist threats or threats to public safety, is entirely undermined by the now available evidence. The platform launches with 764 documented incidents of repression that have taken place in Germany since 2019, impacting thousands of people and silencing diverse expressions of solidarity with the Palestinian people. This marks the first phase of a public database. Additional incidents and data from other countries will be added at regular intervals. Please note that one incident of repression doesn't refer to only one event and can affect several people at once. For more information on how we monitor and register these incidents of repression, please check out the methodology, which is also available on that platform. I will just briefly mention the main key findings, but there are many more findings that I hope you will look up by yourselves when you explore the platform. But the 3 most dominant types of repression out of the 8 categories that we have monitored in Germany are, firstly, censorship, disinformation, and smearing. This refers to instances where any actor spreads false or misleading information or withholds key facts about individuals or groups engaged in Palestine-related activity. Censorship refers to institutions preventing individuals or groups from carrying out Palestine-related expressions or activity, and examples include being smeared on social media, forcing a tenant to remove a Palestine flag, an institution stopping someone from handing out leaflets, or stopping artists from producing Palestine-related content. Note that these incidents, of which we have 175, do not refer to cancelled events. That is a separate category. The second most dominant one in Germany is arrests and law enforcement interventions. With this, we refer to instances where police and security services, such as the border control or internal or outsourced security at institutions or companies, migration authorities, intervene in response to Palestine-related activity. This includes arrests or detentions at demonstrations, raids on activists' houses, or also during an event, and conditions placed on demonstrations such as restrictions of slogans, the banning of speeches, languages even, and tactics like kettling. It also covers in-house or outsourced security, as I've mentioned, because these instances do not only happen by the police in Germany, but also by private security. The third most dominant incident category is legal, financial, and professional repercussions, of which we have 137 incidents at the moment. This refers to consequences or penalties of a legal nature following an individual or group's Palestine-related activity, involving legal proceedings or judicial actions. So this can include cases where an individual is charged with and or fined for a particular offense. But other examples also include being issued fines, a student having their student visa revoked or for delivering a Palestine speech, university students being evicted from an encampment following a evacuation order filed by the university, or the refusal of entry at a border. Note that if the arrest or the intervention itself would be in the category of intervention, and that this is the charge or the fine that follows after that. The main three actors responsible for repression in Germany are, as I think is clear with the data that was just mentioned, is the police, and 338 incidents, members of state institutions in 92 incidents, and journalists or media platforms in 81 instances. The main targets of repression are activists in 385 instances, students or student societies, groups, or organizations in 92 incidents, and artists or cultural groups in 83 incidents. This data was collected through four main means, or through four main sources. Firstly, the report form on our website, where we've collected first-hand testimonies from targets of repression, but also through media and social media monitoring, fieldwork, where we've collected real-time data during events and also by observing the police during demonstrations, and private communications, which we have due to our advocacy campaigns and legal work at the ELSC, which of course provide a lot of information on how the repression occurs. So for us to include these data sources in the database, they have to pass through our inclusion and exclusion criteria, and we then apply data entry guidelines according to the methodology. But also before uploading the data, we conduct a very thorough verification process and check again and again the reliability of sources and transparency, double check on consent and GDPR compliance, and peer review it for consistency, completeness, and accuracy. Our aim is to provide reliable and verifiable data to reveal the systematic nature of the repression, the disinformation tactics used to enable and justify it, the circulation of misleading evidence employed to support these unfounded allegations, and the repetitive nature of these incidents across different sectors of society. This also shows the quantitative patterns of institutionalized racism in Germany. The ban of the slogan, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," is an excellent example of Germany's attempt to restrict freedom of expression as it pertains to the Palestine solidarity movement. In an effort to prohibit public expression of the aforementioned slogan, the German Ministry of Interior has made the dubious claim that the true interpretation of the statement is an incitement to violence against Jews, or that it constitutes or that it is an intellectual property of certain political parties. When in fact, it is a slogan that is calling for decolonization and justice. In the database, you can find 55 instances in which people were charged or fined for saying the slogan, and many of them were charged or fined way before an official ban was issued on November 2nd, 2023. Another example of the blatant disregard of the right of expression by German authorities when it comes to Palestine is their imposition of blanket bans on pro-Palestine demonstrations, which we have seen all across the country during October 2023, but also in previous years, particularly visible during, before, and after the Nakba Commemoration Day on May 15th. An additional key site of repression is the higher education sector, where university students and staff play a central role in the Palestine solidarity movement, engaging in demonstrations that call on universities to uphold their human rights obligations and sever ties with Israeli institutions complicit in war crimes. In response, German state bodies, along with university administrations and management, have worked together to suppress this form of solidarity, leading to serious violations of academic freedom, freedom of expression, and freedom of assembly. Academics and students have been investigated by universities for expressing pro-Palestinian views on social media or for participating in demonstrations. Lecture series and academic events related to Palestine are frequently cancelled. But importantly, these measures go way beyond administrative restrictions. Universities, but also companies and institutions, so places of work, also involve law enforcement, resulting in unconstitutional practices such as unlawful detentions, arrests without charge, and police violence during student demonstrations or any other demonstration. The repressive mechanisms we are speaking about today target protesters, activists, as well as students, academics, artists, and entire civil society sectors, eroding fundamental rights under the guise of public order or combating anti-Semitism or terrorism. More than anyone, they target migrants. The German state has weaponized the immigration, naturalization, visa, or refugee status of migrants to force them into silence. In this climate, legal support alone is not enough. What is needed is a comprehensive political and legal response that both defends the right to speak and act in solidarity with Palestine, and exposes the architecture of repression that seeks to silence it and those responsible for it. Through our legal work, research, and now this public database, the ELSC stands as a critical infrastructure to defend those under attack, documenting the mechanisms of repression and affirming that solidarity is not a crime but a duty. But what does repression actually mean? In psychological terms, repression means the unconscious process of blocking unpleasant thoughts and feelings from awareness in an attempt to protect oneself from anxiety or distress. In political terms, repression means the intentional use of force or violence to prevent people from influencing the political and social structures around them. In the Palestine context, both of these meanings apply. Main actors intentionally misinform others to impose, condition, and to justify repression by starting the story with secondly. While some secondary actors, unintentionally or intentionally, enable the repression because they are misinformed and because they don't want to deal with the uncomfortable thoughts of an ongoing genocide that they might be complicit in. Without further ado, I will pass the mic to Zaid for him to give a first-hand account of how systematic repression happens from top-down and bottom-up structures.
Thank you so much. I do have like 5 minutes to lay out a concrete example of how these complex networks of repression actually operate in Germany. And for lack of time, of course, I will have to cut on so much of the context and like the historical aspect and also the international aspect of this repression, because as a former member of some of the Palestinian Solidarity Network, which is a network of grassroots organizations worldwide that are active mainly on the question of Palestinian prisoners. The repression that took place in Germany and the consecutive ban of Samidun in Germany has led also to be used as one of the main justifications for further bans of Samidun chapters in other countries. So I'll speak about first a more of a concrete example of how this repression in Germany took place, and then I will go more into the repression that I faced myself, but it's also important to note that this is something that affected so much more people than just me, and now the repression that I faced is more or less standard in the German context. Like so many more people, activists, refugees, etc., do face almost exactly the same level of targeting that I faced very early on. So the example starts actually in 2023, before October 7th. This was in April and May of 2023, where there was a very gigantic media smear campaign against the demonstrations on the Zornallee, which is the street that is populated in Berlin by so much of the Arab community and the Palestinian community. And this has led to the ban of the demonstration that was planned on the International Day of Palestinian Prisoners, which was organized by Samidun, and then afterwards also like the ban of the Nakba demonstration in May. And it's important to note the extreme scale of the media smearing that is usually required to pass these kinds of restrictive tactics, especially in the beginnings. Like now they don't need like this amount of smearing, but okay. Like right now these practices are much more normalized in German society, but back then they needed a lot of media work to massage it into the consciousness of people that this is okay and normal to ban a demonstration on the Zornallee. And like afterwards the DIG, which is the Deutsche Israelische Gesellschaft, they applied or they requested the state to list Samidun as a terrorist organization based on so many of these like media articles that were consistently published all over Germany about Samidun and how dangerous it is to German society, more or less, and how anti-Semitic it is and all this kind of stuff. And this has led then afterwards to the Israeli ambassador going to the Zornallee itself, like going to the street with the mayor of Neukölln, which is the area in which the street is, and walking the street with their IDF soldiers and looking at the posters on the street, the pro-Palestine posters, and condemning them, condemning the people of the street, and condemning Samidun and calling for its ban. In June of the same year, so before October 7th, I also received a letter saying that they intend to revoke my refugee status. I am like a Palestinian who was born in Syria. I have been living in Germany now for a couple of years, and so I received this letter even before October 7th, even before the ban of Samidun. Samidun was banned on November 2nd, 2023, so 1 month after, like almost 1 month after, after October 7th, and on October 10th, so 3 days after October 7th, like the Bundeskanzler stood in front of the Bundestag and demanded the ban of Samidun and Hamas, and this ban took effect on the 2nd of November. Then on the 17th of November, like my house was raided, as well as many other houses of other activists. And in that raid, the German media was standing downstairs filming the raid, and then after the police left, started to knock on my door and trying to leave me letters and coming to my place and trying to do interviews with me. And this has led also to the publishing of many articles, not only about Samidun and the raids, but also about me as a person. And I did lose my job afterwards shortly. So this threat to revoke my refugee status did actually take effect. So I did end up losing my refugee status. I did end up losing my residency, and I am facing deportation. I mean, now, like, after the situation also changed in Syria, this is a much more plausible reality than it used to be 2 years ago or 1 year ago. One final very short example of how interconnected these structures are. It took place actually more or less in the beginning of last year up until October of last year, where a journalist came to do an interview with me, and he's an Arab journalist, and lying about what this interview is for. And we did do these interviews, and turns out he worked for TDF. And then TDF published this documentary online, and at the same time, a Zionist organization called Demok, in the same moment as they published these interviews, they published a report about Samidun and Masar Badil and how dangerous they are and how undercover people from them, aka me, and other people are still operating in Germany. And one day after, also Tagesspiegel published a report claiming that me personally, I'm behind the entire student movement in Berlin, But the timing is very important in terms of how things happen and how well they're interconnected and how coordinated they operate. And I could go a step further and say that on the same day, many other similar reports and similar kinds of attacks happened internationally. I don't have enough time to speak about them, but it was a very large attack, and in this period also Samidun was banned in Canada and the US. So there was an attack in almost every single European country where Samidun was active, and these attacks took place either with these kinds of media articles or actual bans of the organization in other places. And all of this is also mapped, of course, in this project, and this is, I think, the importance of this project, that these complex networks and all of these smaller things that happen, but also big things that happen, but because they're so many and so frequent and so dense and complex, it's very difficult to understand how this all interconnects. And this is, of course, what this project attempts to achieve. And this case is one of many, 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 many other cases that are in this database.
Thank you, Zaid. Just a note, on the database we have a whole section that is proportions, in which you can see the relation between the incident types, the actors and the targets, and also some featured incidents to contextualize exactly how these attacks are coordinated between different kinds of actors. So just for you to know that there's a lot more of cases like Zaid's to be checked out there, and a lot more proportions and investigations between the different types of actors and mechanisms to look up there.
Thank you very much. And now we have Robert from Forensic Architecture.
Thank you very much. Is the microphone set up okay?
Do I do this?
Yeah. Thank you. Let me start by saying thank you very much to everybody from ELSC, to Leda and all of the team for your impressive work. Forensic Architecture and Forensis are research agencies at the intersection of human rights, journalism, technology, law, the arts and advocacy. We seek to develop new technologies and tools for investigation and public presentation, and to put those tools in the service of movements and claims for accountability, human rights, transparency, justice, and importantly here, free and open expression. It's in pursuit of those goals that we have worked with ELSC towards realizing this vital project. It's also in some respects an unusual situation for us to work on a project among which we ourselves are data subjects. Incident 3012R9N5. This incident describes the cancellation of an event at which our director, the internationally recognized academic and human rights defender, recipient of the prestigious Right Livelihood Award for Human Rights, Professor A.R. Weitzman, was due to speak with Francesca Albanese, one of the UN's most senior human rights officials, Special Rapporteur for the Occupied Palestinian Territories. As the Index of Repression reveals, the process of the cancellation of this event was not an isolated incident, but a sequence of related actions involving actors from the Berlin Senate to the mayor's office to the press to the leadership of the Freie Universität, involving unsubstantiated smears against Albanese's character and politics particularly, including frankly astonishing and irresponsible accusations of anti-Semitism, ultimately building political and institutional pressure and creating the conditions against which this cancellation was legitimized. This is one of almost 100 cancellations of events since 2019 in Germany that this platform records, and this is a fact that should give journalists, politicians, and everybody in Germany cause for grave concern. Now, our contribution to this project was to help ELSC to visualize and to present their data through an online platform, indexofrepression.org, as you see here. I want to speak very briefly to end about data platforms like this, about why and in what context this kind of research practice is necessary. As my colleagues from ELSC have emphasized, while individual expressions of support for the rights of Palestinians, calls for the operation of international law in the context of Palestine, in the context of the ongoing genocide, when these individual expressions are made, whether that's by artists, activists, students, or the United Nations' most senior human rights officials, when they are suppressed and silenced, this is often characterized as an individual, isolated event and justified on its own terms. But as the data gathered in this index evidences, this is not the case. Society-wide silencing of expression is the operation of a system which is most clearly and emphatically revealed by exactly this kind of aggregation of data. And at Forensic Architecture and Forensis, we have seen this condition before. In 2020 and 2021, we documented more than 1,000 incidents of violence by police across the US in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. In doing so, our platform similarly revealed hitherto concealed patterns of conduct across forces and geographies. For example, a system-wide effort to target journalists, documentarians, and legal observers, a nationwide practice of using riot control munitions, so-called riot control munitions, in potentially lethal ways. Following this in 2022, we published our platform on the illegal pushbacks of refugees and migrants in the Aegean Sea by primarily the Greek Coast Guard. These pushbacks or driftbacks occurring at sea, often far from civil society observers, also often passed in the media as isolated tragic incidents. It was only when Forensic Architecture, Forensis, and our partners together assembled more than 1,000 such incidents into a public digital cartography, rather like this one, that a systemic practice became legible and undeniable. And this is the importance of online platforms such as this and of the continued vital work of the ELSC on this issue. Civil society must insist on the visibility of otherwise hidden systems such as this, and they must do so through the thorough and robust documentation of the moments through which the system reveals itself. Rights and liberties are always more easily violated in isolation in conditions of exception, and this report should remind us that these events are not occurring in isolation at all. By rendering such a systemic practice visible, ELSC has better equipped us all to reject and to oppose it. And we at Forensic Architecture and Forensis are grateful for that tireless effort, and we're proud to be a partner in it. Thank you.
And now Sophia will talk about future plans with our ongoing project.
Okay. Sorry, some rearranging. Thank you so much, Zaid, for giving us such a strong example of the systemic way in which Palestine repression in Germany works. And thank you to Bob for giving us an overview of how this investigation, but also other investigations led and supported by Forensic Architecture, Forensis, help to hold governments and state actors accountable for the role they play in perpetuating political violence. We hope that the Index of Repression too can be used as a tool to hold actors of repression accountable, firstly by inspiring and facilitating further research, by supporting legal challenges, and through advocacy work. I will briefly conclude this presentation section of the press conference by outlining future steps and contributions that the database makes. So, one of the aspects that makes the Index of Repression particularly relevant to our broader understanding of repression is that it shows how repression occurs not only through law enforcement, but actually, as we heard also just now, often begins much earlier. It may begin when public discourse portrays Palestinians and those in support of Palestinian liberation as violent, and turn into legally ambiguous bans on slogans and groups. You can see many more incidents, such as also the ban on the Palästina Solidarität Duisburg group on our platform. In our database, we can clearly see how discourse moves into policy, politics, and law. The political nature of the law becomes evident, for example, when tracing the severe effects of non-legally binding parliamentary resolutions and other non-legal notions, like the concept of the reason of state or Staatsräson. In our featured incidents, we show how they are mobilized in the way accusations against targets of repressions are framed, how they're used in arguments and litigation, and to justify court judgments. Reporting often focuses on spectacular moments of repression, but the time frame of our database allows us to see what led up to these moments, as well as understanding their aftermath. While the dataset we present today showcases a total of 766 incidents of repression in Germany alone, this number represents merely the tip of the iceberg. Since adding our first round of incidents onto the public index of repression, new attempts to silence and smear opposition to genocide have already occurred. Thus, for us, the continuing and escalating nature of the repression means that we understand the database not only as an archive of repression, but an ongoing and ever-expanding project. Germany, unfortunately, is not exceptional in its repression of Palestine solidarity, as we know from our monitoring work across Europe. In recent years, we have observed similar trends in Britain and the Netherlands, which will be added next to the Index of Repression. And here I just want to encourage our audience to report incidents of anti-Palestine repression across Europe through our website, because the database you see today would have never been possible without the help and courage of those who reported the repression they experienced. If you have faced repression yourself, you are not alone. This repression is systematic, as we show. It is not about individual acts or actors who are alleged to break the law. Instead, our data shows that it is the authorities who repeatedly obstruct rather than protect the right to protest and generate new forms of illegality. Our aim with the database is to counteract the isolating experience of repression and encourage those who continue organizing against genocide and for a free Palestine. We also hope that the research and monitoring work that went into producing the Index of Repression will serve other movements to contextualize and understand systematic silencing and institutionalized racism, and provide information that can be used to resist the tactics of repression used against them. To this end, we are very much looking forward to developing trainings around the database and collaborate with partners, other initiatives and movements to understand how the tactics we have monitored are used in other contexts as well. Because just like Germany is not exceptional in repressing dissent to genocide, the Palestine Solidarity Movement is also not the only one facing repression. Creating consent for genocide requires distorting and silencing the voices that are not submitting to consent. That is why we want our database to be used by collectives and researchers, lawyers and journalists, as a tool to expose the techniques by which dissent is being punished. We hope that the Index of Repression can make an important contribution in that way by highlighting that no allegation justifies the scale of repression we are witnessing against the Palestine Solidarity Movement across Europe today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation. First and foremost, the Monitor Department at the European Legal Support Center. With me on stage today, Leila and Sophia. But I also want to thank Zaid for the presentation. Sorry that it was so few time, but there will be space for interviews after the Q&A. And thanks to Robert and Forensic Architecture and Forensics. The website just looks so, yeah, I love it. Thank you so much for your contribution. So now we start with the Q&A, and the way we're going to do this is, yeah. Yeah, okay, so we will stop the live stream now, and yeah. 3 questions before we answer.